Hello!
Welcome, everyone.
Welcome. This is our fourth episode, although that sounds very fancy, of our club, which is so exciting. I'm just wondering, in the past, and I think we've had it like this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. Exposing my messy room, yeah.
Exposed. I'm at my grandparents' house because it was my mum's birthday yesterday. So we had some really nice lunch, and I think they're going on a walk. But that's where I am. Got a lovely bookshelf behind me.
And the headband. You need to address the headband.
Oh, yeah. I forgot I was wearing that. So the book that we're doing this month, or I think it's been a month that we
yeah, I think actually I looked today and it's been exactly 4 weeks.
That's probably the best we've ever done.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
This was our October book, and it is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, who also wrote Fahrenheit, is it
451? Yeah.
Which I really want to read, especially now I've read this. We both got these beautiful covers, which we'll talk more about later.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go for something a bit spooky. So I've put these on, but I completely forgot I had them on. So yes, I'm trying to get the wear out of them. I read this article about how bad Halloween costumes are for the environment because they end up in landfill. And so I'm getting the wear out of it,
Yeah.
I've got to wear it at any occasion that I can. But how have you been before we begin? How's life been for you?
For me?
Yeah.
For people watching. Busy, honestly. Like today I finally got in the flow of work and whatever. But this actually was sounds really cliche, but it was a really good book to kind of break it up a little bit because it's actually a children's story technically.
I've been reading only children's books recently because we're both on the same course, which anyone who's been here before will know. But we are in our third year of our degree, which is extremely stressful. So I have literally only been able to read books for fun at the moment because every time I have time to sit down, I don't want to read something depressing.
Yeah.
Although I think it's quite dark, this book.
Yeah, it got scarier towards the end.
There
was a switch, and then but I still think it's not as bad as I thought because when I know I chose the book actually technically.
Yes, you did.
For some reason I was thinking you did. Oh no, it was because
to read it.
I marked it to read on Goodreads, and then you saw it and you were like, "Oh, how about this for the book club?" And I was like, "Yeah, I got to do it actually," because I would like to have got to it eventually. But yeah, then I didn't know that it was. I knew it was about a circus. I knew it was kind of spooky, but I didn't think it was going to be scary. And then I read I don't know whether it was a blurb or whether it was something online. It was this is a horror book, and I was like, what on earth have I signed us up for?
And what's really funny is in my head, I really don't like horror.
Yeah.
And when I heard it was a horror book, I was like, oh no, what have I got myself in for? But I really enjoyed it. And I quite liked being scared by it in a way.
Yeah, it was kind of
so brilliantly.
A little bit bizarre, so it was kind of creepy, but it wasn't properly scary.
Yeah.
It's just about the level of horror I can handle.
You're freaked out by it and you have to keep reading.
Yeah.
But not scared.
Yeah.
Although there were a few bits in this book, which we'll get to later, where I was a bit scared.
Yeah.
Especially one of the characters in particular, who we'll talk about later as well. But, okay, first thing I wanted to ask you was what, if you can cast your mind back and remember, what was the thing that made you want to read this book?
This is going to sound really bad, but I think on Instagram, it's a very autumn aesthetic. And not this particular book, but I think actually, what is it called? The October Country. I think that's the one, which is another one by him, which is also lesser well known than this and then Fahrenheit 451, obviously. But so I saw it in lots of people's autumn pictures, and I thought I really like I really like this season of autumn, but there's not actually that many books that are like directly like set in autumn about autumn. Usually people read like Dark Academia or like some
So true. Or a book
spooky
that
fantasy or something.
is back to school period.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking like The Secret History. But
Yeah, exactly.
you've got that, as you say, Dark Academia feeling. That's so true. And I think there aren't many adults, like not children's books, that are very autumn centric.
Yeah.
They tend to be more summer centric.
Or Christmassy. Yeah.
We've been doing a module called Fiction and Non-Fiction, which is really interesting. And we're finding out how books are pushed as summer books and Christmas books. And so maybe that's part of the reason why there aren't so many. I don't know.
Yeah, and having the entire thing set, I think it's just before Halloween or just after. No, it must be just before because it's all set in October.
Was it
a
week or a few days? Maybe a few days. I can't remember.
And part of the kind of like atmosphere, it feels very kind of close, and because you're following like not very many people and over like a short period of time. So just like the whole, like I think it did feel very autumnal, which is what I wanted.
I think it feels. You say about it feeling close, and that's such a good way to describe it because it feels more and more intimate and therefore more and more palpable as the book goes on. I just felt that, especially towards the end, you not only feel really close to the characters, but you feel incredibly close to the action as well. And it's like it gets more scary for that reason because you almost feel like you're the one that's being chased or run away.
Without going into spoilers, like it feels kind of like much of the beginning of the book is the boys like kind of thinking something could be going on but maybe not, and then the minute they kind of address it and like they make a plan, it then like becomes entirely about that, and it feels like you kind of forget about everyone else, even their mothers.
I completely forgot about that. And when they come up in a later scene, because the boys see them across the road, I was like, oh yeah, they exist. But I also think, although we've touched on it, we have to talk about this edition because I'm obsessed with it. Firstly, it's so small. We've been talking about this StreamYard.
Yeah, I might try and grab another paperback.
So it's very confusing. But yes, it's tiny. When I'm wearing dungarees, I can fit it in my dungarees pocket, which I really enjoy. And I wasn't expecting it to be that small either.
Yeah, so this is it's really small.
Normal People's not even that big.
People's a normal paperback, like UK paperback, yeah.
Normal paperback. Is the American edition.
Yes.
Simon Schuster.
Yeah.
I think. And we had to order it especially. It was quite hard. I think you managed to find it, Jemima. I wasn't able to find it anywhere.
Yeah, it was well, I think this edition is from 2017. I thought it was a lot earlier than that. But you could find it used everywhere, but not new, and I kind of wanted a new copy, although it did come looking used.
It's funny because I really don't mind if the book is used. I'm really funny that if it's my book and I bought it new, I want it to stay pristine. But if it's a used book and it's a bit beaten up, I quite like it.
Yeah.
But this one, I just had to have this edition.
Yeah.
And the British editions, I really hated. I wasn't able to find a nice one anywhere. There was a really nice hardback folio edition, but that was ridiculous amounts of money.
Yeah.
So I was so happy with this. And yes, mine is ripped as well at the back, but like you said, I think it adds to it.
Yeah, because it's so small and it's so like it feels, because obviously this was published in the 60s originally. It feels almost like it's from the 60s, you know, there's something like and even like obviously the design, like they're trying to look retro and like an old-fashioned carnival or whatever.
I think it's like a ticket for
right.
Which I love.
I love the font.
That's great for the live stream, Anna. Just stick it in front of your face. But yeah, I am obsessed with this. It looks so nice on a shelf as well. And this particular edition as well actually ends at this point. Hang on, like that.
Yeah.
It's not as big as you think because it's got a whole section on history, content, and criticism.
Yeah, it's almost 100 pages.
And some of the front pages.
I said, oh no, it said it's almost 100 pages.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it's a long. I actually found that a little bit off-putting.
I thought I would kind of just fly through it, but I read it over quite a long. I suppose it wasn't that long, but it felt like the story sat with me for quite a long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I just burnt through it immediately. But speaking of the story, I can see we're 10 minutes in and we haven't really told anyone what it's about.
Oh, yeah, right.
So I naively went into this book thinking it was going to be like The Night Circus.
Okay.
Not really. Have you read The Night Circus?
No, I would love to though, yeah.
It's so good. It's one of, I mean, I have an interesting relationship with that book because it's one of my favourite books, but I've only read it once. So I really do need to reread it.
A long time ago.
Yeah, I think it was in around 2014.
Okay.
I really do need to reread it because who knows if I even like it anymore. But The Night Circus, without going on too much of a tangent, is about this kind of mystical, magical circus that just arrives without warning, and then it just disappears without warning overnight. And this book is a bit like that in a sense. There are definitely a lot of parallels, but The Night Circus is much more whimsical and exciting and enchanting. And fun.
Is it mostly a romance?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I can't remember if it's mostly a romance. The romance is a big part of it, but I would say the circus itself is a character of its own and possibly the main character because it's such a huge part of it. But this book, Something Wicked This Way Comes, definitely similar to The Night Circus, but not whimsical.
Okay. Was The Night Circus spooky?
Not really. It's more sort of intriguing and a curiosity thing. And it has dark moments, but they don't scare you. Whereas like the book, there were points where I was on the edge of my seat. Not knowing what was going to happen next. And this carnival, so to explain the book to everyone who's patiently waiting for me to finish my tangent, it is this carnival that just arrives, but it comes at the wrong time of year because it comes in October, which at the time, in this small American town, is it set in the 40s or 50s?
I think the 50s.
The 50s, that sort of time.
Yeah.
That's not a very common thing for a carnival to turn up in October. And it's really strange. Immediately from the offset, there's something not quite right about the carnival. And these two boys who are called Will Halloway and Jim Nightshade, who are, how old are they? Are they 14? 15?
Yeah, I think I remember 14.
Possibly.
But somewhere around there, yeah.
Around that age. I always remember the emotions.
Yeah, they feel about 7 in my mind.
They do. And that's something I really want to talk to you about. So that's kind of the basic premise for the book, that this carnival shows up and everything kind of starts to go a bit wrong without revealing too much. It's this really kind of spooky, dark carnival. But yes, this book definitely tackles themes of childhood and adulthood and the kind of clash between that. I completely agree with you about them seeming like they were 7. Like they just seem like really small children.
Yeah. Well, partly it will be because, well, first of all, the era, I think kids were kids. and that's not really like a thing now. Like a 14-year-old or something will be not a kid. But also because they're obviously they're vulnerable because they're scared and they're being chased or whatever. So they automatically seem smaller. But yeah, just some of the, I think particularly Will, some of the things he would say were just like so sweet. It was so like tiny. He just felt so little, yeah.
And also, it really made me wonder if ages, and I think you were touching on this, have kind of changed. Because they definitely were not like teenage boys that I went to school with.
No.
They were very much like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this has happened. And the way they spoke was really entertaining to read.
Yeah, but I don't think that was him, the author, getting it wrong.
No, I don't think so either.
I really do think it might have been an era thing.
What did you say for that?
I do think it could be to do with the era it's set. Yeah,
I agree. But there was some really, I need to try and find this bit. There was just this bit that Will was randomly freaking out that he might be turned into a snail or something, even though it had nothing to do with the plot. And I'm like, Will, just tone it down. I can't cope with the enthusiasm. They're so enthusiastic and passionate about everything. And I think we both listened to the audiobook, didn't we?
Yeah, I read it physically till about the halfway point, and then I switched over to reading along while listening to the audiobook.
Yeah. I listened to a really good audiobook. I can't remember. Let me see if I can find the narrator. I think it was quite an old audiobook, but the man narrating mine gave a really theatrical performance. So he was really enthusiastic when he was saying the boys' lines and dialogue, which I think fitted Bradbury's style quite well. What was your narrator like?
Similar. I don't know whether I can't find out. Foley, maybe was the name with the.
Mine was.
No, actually, it doesn't really say. It was a free one on YouTube, actually, which you can usually find for most classics.
Mine was the set that they're just referred to as Hecht, Heccht. I can't really spell. But apparently they're an iconic narrator, and it was recorded. It says 1962, but I don't know if that's when the book came out.
Yeah, I think that's just when it was published.
Yeah, so it sounded like quite an old book though, but there was something about reading it. There was one point where I was listening to the audiobook in a particularly scary chapter, which is when, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's set in a library.
Yeah, that was the point where it got scary for me.
And I had to stop listening to the audiobook because I'd put it on when I was trying to go to sleep, because I kind of helped me drift off. Because prior to that, there's quite a lot of introspective dialogue from Will's father, where he's just theorizing about things and being intelligent. And I thought, I can just kind of have that on in the background. And I had to stop it because I was like, no, Anna, you need to actually read this and be awake. And it was too scary. But I really enjoyed it. That's another thing I need to ask you. Sorry, I'm talking so much.
Okay.
How many stars did you give it?
Okay. I gave it 3.5.
Okay. I think that's.
Is that very controversial?
I gave it 4, I think. And what's funny is it's one of those books where in my head I was toying between 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah. Right,
5 felt a bit much. I wouldn't say it was a perfect book. I mean, I'm saying this, and this is Ray Bradbury. So, but there were bits that I didn't love. For me, a 5-star book is like perfect for me.
I would have given it 5.
3.5.
For like some passages, I think deserved 5. Like particularly the father's, like he kind of monologues a bit,
Yeah.
which which I almost went into being a bit too much. But the content of that, sometimes he'd say like a phrase or a couple of lines or something, and I'd be like, wow, this is important. I feel like I should be writing this down somewhere.
That's so interesting, because when I read that monologue, I didn't like it. Controversial, because that I felt that monologue came in a time of real tension, and I was so desperate to know what happened next that I was like, "Oh, come on, Ray, just get a move on."
Maybe because I was listening to it on 2 times speed. So he was really going for it, you know.
I love that. I couldn't have listened to this book on 2 times speed with my narrator. I think I would have lost my mind. It's so enthusiastic. But yes, I think that might be a passage that I go back and read.
Yeah.
Have you ever read 1984?
No.
No. So in 1984, exactly halfway through the book, George Orwell just throws in a massive essay, like a political essay explaining the politics. And you're just like, George, please, I'm trying to read a book. Can we not? Can we maybe come back to this later? And so I kind of felt like that with the monologue, that it was just such a high tension time in the book. And maybe because I was listening to it, and it just felt a bit like it was going on and on. But now that you've said that and said that there were quotes that you really enjoyed, I want to go back.
Yeah, well, I think that obviously there's a huge, like, this is very plot driven. There's something like very clearly going on that you're following from the start to the end. But I do think that a lot of it was what you kind of briefly said earlier is a commentary on like age. And I think that was obviously the main thing that the father was kind of like currently dealing with.
I find Will's father really fascinating as a character, because this is, I think, the first children's book I've ever read where the parent has been a major force in the book and a major positive force, and almost a protagonist in the same sense as the boys. Like, he was hugely influential to the book. And I found that fascinating because I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that he wasn't really, that there were a couple of conversations earlier between Will and him, but then kind of like about the midway point, he just like fully was involved. And yeah, I agree that like it was nice that it was positive, and it was nice like how the boys, you know, you felt like they were going to try and sort this problem out by themselves, and then they were actually like, we're scared, help. And they were and the fact that Will was, I mean, we can get into this later, but he was like so desperate to protect his father. He was like, I don't care about myself and my own safety or even Jim's. I care about getting any other people involved. And he was so like against that. And then to have the adult like get involved and that to be like a positive thing, and for Will to understand that he was willing to help him through it, I thought was really interesting.
I feel like the boys needed to learn from an adult in this sense, because they were making all of these kind of adventure decisions and throwing themselves into these situations. And he kind of came in as this external force and was able to give a new perspective and fix things. And I thought it was lovely, because in all other children's books, the children can't have adventures until the adults leave. And they have to figure it out all by themselves. But it was just really nice to read it, especially as someone I'm really close with my mum and have a nice relationship with her. So it was quite nice to read about a positive parent-son relationship. I really enjoyed it. I think before we get into spoilers, why don't we talk about the characters? So tell me characters that stood out to you, your feelings about them. Tell me a bit about that.
what I liked the father, obviously, but we've already kind of gone through that a bit. Just some of the things he said, he brought up really interesting kind of ideas, which I think he was more almost speaking to himself than he was to the boys. But then I loved Will.
Yeah.
And he was just so sweet, and some of the things he said, like he's like, "Oh golly gosh," and like
Yeah.
all this stuff.
I was just saying how they say, "Oh my gosh," and it's all one
Yeah.
word. I really love.
And I loved how protective he was of his father, but also of Jim. And there were so many scenes where actually, like, I think it's very rare to have like a friendship that's kind of that intense that the boys have between each other. The point where like they'll spend all day together, and then they live opposite next door to each other, so they'll like hang out the window speaking to each other, and they're just absolutely like almost like brothers, but like closer than that because they kind of have chosen each other. And so I liked their relationship. I particularly liked the way that Will was in their relationship.
I completely agree, and it's really funny because I almost connected more with Jim, which is odd. I'm much more like Will.
Yeah.
I'm definitely the one that's like, oh, maybe we should just check that this is all safe before we do it. And like an adventure sounds really cool, but we need to be a bit cautious about this and not throw ourselves into it. But this is such a basic reason, but I think because Jim had dark hair.
Okay.
When I first read it, I was like, yeah, Jim's my man, you know. And then as it developed, I just fell in love with both of them. I thought they were both really lovely characters.
Yeah, and very distinct personalities, which could have been missed, like considering that they're the exact same age and they live in the same area and they have like similar lives in many ways, but they felt very different. And also my audiobook narrator kind of read their voices quite similarly, but then I could still always tell who was speaking because of the characterization. Yeah.
See, towards the beginning of the book, for me, I was getting them mixed up a bit when I was still figuring out who they were. And then there were two defining things. It was when we found out that Jim had this thing about wanting to be older. That kind of made him really distinct. And also when Will's father became a more prominent figure.
Yeah.
That again made them very separate characters in my mind. And the whole thing with the theatre as well, which doesn't really come back again, I don't think. But I thought that was quite interesting as well. I just loved them. I thought they were really lovely boys and lovely characters. How
do you have a favourite villain?
Oh, this is exactly what I was going to ask. A favourite villain. Well, it's really hard because I hated all of them. They're also not. You don't despise them. They have vulnerabilities as well, especially towards a scene at the end to do with a shootout. Not quite a shootout, but you know what I mean. Where you suddenly realise that they are scared of things, which I found really interesting for a villain. But I think my favourite one was Mr. Dark. I think just because I would happily read a book just about Mr. Dark and his origin story, the crazy things he got up to. For people who haven't read it, is known as the Illustrated Man, and he runs this carnival that's called Cougar and Dark's Carnival, and he's covered in not quite tattoos, because they're described as tattoos, and then Ray Bradbury goes, no, they're not tattoos, they're illustrations. So it's more that they're like a part of him.
They're almost like personified.
Yeah, completely. And they almost have their own lives as well, which is a bit disturbing.
Yeah, there's a scene in the library at the beginning when Mr. Dark's talking with his father, and he says the boys are describing something to the father about him, and they keep like referring to him as all these things, and and then the father's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, the tattooed man, and then it like explains it. But because he's referred to like in so many different ways, it's like he becomes bigger than he is, which I think is the whole point of that scene.
And I think because he has all of those, we get this sense that these tattoos represent lives that he has a hold over,
Yeah.
and different people within the carnival. And so you get this sense that he's more than just one person. And he has this great power that he's carrying around with him. But I think he's got so much style, the illustrated man. Like he's definitely one of those, camp is the wrong word, but one of those villains that really enjoys being a villain.
Yeah, he's like suave.
Yes, suave is a good word. And really living in it and loving every minute of it.
I think actually, do we want to get into spoilers? And so I can.
Yeah, I think we're at the half-hour mark, so spoiler time.
There's a description the father, one of his many tangents.
Good old Mr. Holloway with his tangents.
Says that the people in the circus, the members of the circus, could have been people in lives who then kind of sacrificed themselves for the circus. So they came like trapped in the circus because of their greed or their, something like that. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't give it 5 stars was because there were so many things like that were kind of like dropped in there and that really interested me, but then were never developed on. And like similarly, kind of what you're talking about, how I feel like there's a million things that like could have been like explored to do with Mr. Dark's past if he's been alive for however long they thought he'd been alive for. And like it kind of like calls out for, I don't know, not a sequel, but like an explanation or like a history or something of what's been going on.
Well, I got really excited and then really disappointed because I found out that Ray Bradbury had a book called The Illustrated Man. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be it. This is young Mr. Dark. This is his glory days, how he got into the carnival. And all it is, by the sounds of it, is just this story of when he was like developing ideas for the character. And I think it's been put with other stories in a book. I was like, no, that's not what I want. Because he does this. I get the sense that Ray Bradbury is almost just fizzing with ideas.
Yeah.
And he occasionally has this where he will, obviously this is a time where books were much more laborious to edit. So he was presumably like typing it out. But he will just go off on a tangent. And you almost think you need to come back to us. We're losing you.
I fully agree with that. And I think maybe that he's too, this sounds like an awful thing to say, but I think he's too clever for a children's book.
I do understand that. I do.
Yeah. Not that children's books are basic and, but that some of his ideas he had were kind of like almost philosophical and they reached beyond, but then he was kind of knowing he had to restrain himself because he was writing this for like a 12-year-old.
That breaks my heart a bit that there is such strong gatekeeping within publishing that you need to put things in a box. Because I just don't think you can class this as a children's book.
Yeah.
It's as much for adults as children. And there are two sides to the coin because there's the side of what it feels like to be a child wanting to be an adult and what it feels like to be an adult wanting to be younger as well. And I connected to both of those feelings. I think especially for someone our age who's kind of on the cusp of both. I found it really interesting.
Maybe because the protagonists technically are the boys. So they probably, I doubt it was something that he was like, I'm going to write a children's book. He was probably like, I'm going to write a book, and then they've marketed it like even more so, like probably across the years as a children's book because they're trying to fit it into like the publishing thing.
I bet that's what's happened. I've just seen we've had a few more people joining the live stream.
Oh, nice.
So hello everyone. And we're talking about Something Wicked This Way Comes, which we've been reading and loving, and we're into the spoiler section now. So I wanted to ask you, we were talking just before we went live about the weird situation in which this book happened. And the was it the dedication?
It was there's like an afterword, I think.
Yeah,
a brief afterword, which is honestly 2.5 pages.
Yeah, it's the way that this book came into being is just crazy.
Yeah,
I don't understand it.
It's almost something that I read it straight after, and I was like, why were we not told this earlier?
Exactly. So what is it? It was Gene Kelly. And did he direct Singing in the Rain? Or was it more than that?
He performed in it.
He performed in it. Okay, that was it.
But he did a private screening of collection of musicals called Invitation to the Dance.
That was it.
So then he said he was so inspired by that, and so as he was going home, his wife suggested that he look through Gene Kelly's like past stuff and find something that he could like adapt into a book, and he found this thing called The Black Ferris.
Yes, which was like the first incarnation of the story. And this book is
10 pages.
So small, but it literally took years to write.
Yeah.
Which I can't get my head around. Because he obviously, by the time he sat down to actually write it, he must have known the story so well. Because if you read this end bit, I'd really recommend trying to get a hold of this copy if you can, because it's really interesting. He did so many different versions and he played around so much with different characters. But yeah, I think, were there talks of it being a film early on? And then
it says it was going to be a screenplay. It was a screenplay. Then he adapted to a novel, and then the novel was meant to be broken down into screenplay again, so that they could adapt the novel. But then, they actually got a director and everything for it, but they didn't end up doing it. And then, produced it.
Okay. And then I'm hooked.
Yeah, after everything, he literally got the biggest company he could have possibly got for it to adapt it.
And did they adapt it?
Yeah, they got Disney. Yeah, it's very old though.
I don't think you better to watch it, because especially with something you're scared of, I feel like the real power lies in your head. And as soon as someone turns it into a puppet or something, it kind of destroys it a bit for me. But what I was about to say was, I think it would work really well as a Netflix series, like a short kind of autumn, because it's definitely a story that you need to spend time on. I don't think this is my worry about it being a film, because there's so much that you need to kind of just sit with and think about. And
it's very
contemplative. Yes, contemplative. I can't say that word.
Yeah.
You have to sit and think about it.
Yeah, there was actually, strangely enough, like the way that it read felt like a short story. Which is obviously not, because it's too long. And it's even too long, I think, to be like a novella kind of thing.
Yeah.
But something about it, I don't even think it was the length, like the atmosphere of it, or the way it was written or something, felt like it had the tropes of like a short story, like that whole kind of having like a lesson to learn, and like the plot being not the main deal, not being the point.
Yeah, and there was definitely like a takeaway, and it felt like quite a packaged thing. it wasn't like a piece of literary fiction where you're going on and on aimlessly. It was really plot driven. That's another thing I read in the end bit, that it talked about the fact that people think Ray Bradbury just made his own genres, because I don't think this is strictly horror. I think it's it overlaps into all sorts of other different areas. I don't know what you think about that.
It felt magical realism to me, but I think this kind of goes along with that whole thing about how he doesn't feel like he's writing for any of these things. He just feels like he was obviously like very passionate about the story and very passionate about the guy who originally come up with the idea, or a version of the idea, and the way he kind of took it, it's just like I can imagine him like just in his study or whatever, just like writing away and like being a bit like it kind of probably the first draft being completely mad, and making his editor's life I'll say miserable. But yeah, it feels like it could be possible that he is writing within his own genres, or getting rid of the genre completely.
Yeah, he's definitely not following like a save the cat plot structure. Although weirdly it possibly even does, because you've definitely got this kind of mentor figure in, is it Charles Holloway, I think is
that's right.
name? But we've talked a lot about Charles. One thing I want to
just as Charles talks a lot about Charles.
Oh yeah, this is all we want to talk about. But one thing I really wanted to ask you was, which character scared you the most?
I found the first time I felt slightly scared was the Dust Witch, or whatever she is, whatever her name is, that one. But the first time I was properly like freaked out was in the library. No, it was not in the library. It was before the library when the boys were in the grate, and
yes,
Mr. fully just like shocked me with this. Like he said, like there was one line that began it, and he was just like so direct with with Will's father, and I was like, okay, this is like a little bit scary. Yeah. So he was really, and also the whole thing about him being like this kind of ancient being that's been alive, I was just like,
because also that takes away any power that our man Charles had, because you kind of thought that he maybe had an upper hand, or was on the same kind of playing field being adult as well, and then you're like, oh no, what's happening? That bit scared me, and with him being so direct as well, like there was absolutely no, oh, I'm just pretending that I'm doing,
because he was so charming and like trying to work around it, but then he realized he finally kind of snapped and was like, listen.
It was the bit, this is a major spoiler, but it was when he had the tattoos, boys' faces on his hands, and was like, I'm looking for these boys to their father. And you're like, oh no!
Yeah.
It was scary. And the fact
also
that they were
hit the thing. Did he do it, or did the witch do it to Charles's hand?
Yeah.
That was horrible.
He does it.
And there was this description of that, and it was so gruesome and like, oh gosh.
There was also, I think, I don't quite know how he does it, but he really played on essential human fears.
Yeah.
Like there's a part where the boys are essentially like locked into their bodies.
Oh yeah.
In a state of paralysis, which I don't think was fully thought through, because he says that he blinds them, but then also the boys can see everything that's happening. So I was a bit confused about that, Ray. But that bit really scared me.
Yeah, and again, there was a description of their eyes being sewn shut and like all this,
and their mouths,
and yeah, and the when they're waiting in the carnival, like because they they have no like control over themselves. They're like drooling and crying because they're like stuck in this.
What was even worse was that they put them in the wax figures, just drooling and crying in like 2 swords.
Yeah, I think it would really be scary for a child.
If I'd read that as a child, I would have been terrified.
Yeah, and often I will read things set like around a similar time period, and it's like I read Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is obviously a lot earlier than that, but that is marketed as like a horror, and it's really like I was laughing at the parts that were meant to be scary because it was a lot more kind of toned down.
I haven't read it, but I've seen an animated film of it. And
yeah,
it's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, but that was like apparently really scary when it came out. Whereas I feel like this could have been like that marketed it as a horror, and it's not quite a horror, but it was definitely but points of it were definitely scary.
I think one of the bits, possibly the bit that scared me the most, was when the Dust Witch has the power to stop their hearts. I'm not even touching them, just by saying her little, whatever it is, sewing needle dragonfly.
Yeah.
And doing her whole witchy thing.
And she just says like slow down or something. Yeah.
Just terrified me. And have you ever seen Spirited Away? The film? I don't know why, because she was never ever described as this, but I imagined her being like that freaky, enormous woman.
With a huge head, yeah.
Yeah. That you get the sense that she's kind of floating. She's not human. And I don't think she was described as that. I can't remember.
I don't think she was really described at all.
No, that's obviously.
I actually think lots of the side bad characters, not bad, but like, the spookier ones, were not very well described.
But I wonder if that's intentional.
Yeah, it makes them almost scarier.
Because you
kind of need your imagination to kind of fill in the gaps, yeah.
Although I know you don't imagine pictures in your head.
Yeah.
You've talked about this at length. But I think for people who do, you kind of manifest the scarier things and things that you don't like, and you put it on the character. The Dust Witch she freaked me out, man. I didn't like her at all.
What about the bit when she's the balloon?
Yes.
And Will goes out in the night. Yeah.
What was that, Ray? That whole balloon in the coffin dream.
And it was even like very out of character for Will.
Yeah.
Because he went off in the middle of the night on his own. It was just.
Was that Will?
I think so, yeah. Because I remember thinking like, that's a bit strange.
I'd thought that was Jim, but it must have been Will if you remember it as.
Yeah. And I think he was doing it because he was anxious for his family and for Jim.
Oh, okay.
But I still thought like that it felt like the whole scene felt kind of out of place, and the fact then that it didn't even mean anything.
Okay, let's do I feel like we should have some like music in the background. Things that Ray Bradbury put in and completely forgot about. Were completely irrelevant. Never came back to.
Like we could be here for a while. Because I think actually lots of these things were kind of planted in your mind as thoughts and ideas that he kind of wants you to think on, but then he'll just leave it so that you can do that. But it does mean that he doesn't finish a lot of his.
And also a lot of them.
Yes.
I mean, he writes in his own way. He's not constricted by rules. So it could have been completely intentional, but I was really expecting these images to be called back at the end. It opens with the lightning rod and this lightning storm that's going to happen, and yet there's no lightning.
Yeah, what even happened to that guy?
Well, apparently he got shrunk into that. I think he's described as the dwarf.
Yeah, that's actually one thing that I will say. The descriptions of that figure were very not what you say, yeah. And there were some scenes I marked. Even this line that's like the boys are trying to, when they're hiding from Mr. Dark, it says, Jim scooched himself down into a dwarf, Will crammed himself down into a midget, you know, and it was just like, really?
No.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
And some of the, like, he would, I don't know why he felt the need to like really go into details about like, because it's like he was using so many like metaphors and similes and whatever to describe things that he would then describe something which everyone like knows what something looks like, and then then he kind of run with it too far, you know.
The barber's pole that went on for like, it felt like the whole book.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, can we talk about, there was the most beautiful woman in the world that just, she was in a sort of with water in it or something.
Yeah.
And then she just vanished. Never heard about that again. Miss Foley got turned into a child.
Yeah, and we just
left for dead, possibly. We don't really know. There was
even the skeleton man, which again, not a great character because it's just a very skinny man. Yeah. Like at the end, just kind of.
I was imagining a skeleton.
Huh?
I was imagining an actual skeleton.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know what he meant, and then he described it. I was like, isn't that just a person? You know, like. And then but he picks up Mr. Dark at the end and then leaves with him. And like he's the only character you're kind of told anything about, and he's also one of the most like irrelevant one of the lot. Yeah, there were a lot of things are explored and then completely left behind.
Quite interesting things. That's what makes it disappointing, that he sets them up like they're going to be really significant, and then just, I don't know if he just forgot, or
I wonder if there were points he was trying to make that we've just missed. Like I need to read up on it. But again, if this is marketed to a child, they're not gonna. It's gonna leave their brain like as soon as they finish reading it.
I do wonder. I mean, this probably wasn't something the authors thought about, but I bet if a child got a book in the 60s, they probably or almost definitely would have read it more than once.
Okay.
I feel like children now, I don't want to be like, oh, back in the day, but including me, we all, even though I'm not technically a child anymore, we all have this appetite for just consuming so things. And I do wonder whether this book is almost designed for someone to read it several times and really think about all of the things.
And maybe even be read too.
Yes, between an adult and a child, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, and that would explain it's not the genre, but like kind of the classification of it being a kid's book. If it required a parent to read it to them, then they're kind of both benefiting from it. It's like kids' films that have adult humor in, but the kid can't pick up on it, are like enjoyable for the parent to watch as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
This is a complete like stab in the dark. It could be, I could just, you know, I don't know. I'm interested in who it's really aimed for.
Yeah, because the target audience is a bit ambiguous. I don't really. It's not like you're like, oh yeah, it's this.
And I read a review actually of someone saying that they got comments about, like, because they're an adult, like probably in their like 30s or 40s or something, had a comment from like other adults being like, oh, you're reading a children's book, you know. I'm like, I don't think this is a book that you'd be like, oh, you're reading that. Obviously that's a stupid comment to make anyway.
Yeah,
there's a million things wrong with that, but like I don't think this is a children's book.
It's also, this edition is not packaged like a children's book.
No,
like,
and all the content at the end, and like getting who is it, like Stephen King, Seth Grahame-Smith, and Margaret Atwood.
Yeah,
they're not people who write for children.
And also, it's got a quote from the New York Times, the Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle. You know, like wins the Smarties Book Prize and the Blue Peter Book Awards.
Yeah,
this is something, not those brilliant awards, by the way, but this is definitely something much darker and quite philosophical as well. It talks a lot about death and about vulnerability.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
And about just life in general, the futility of life.
Even the mental health of the father, I think, would be quite scary for a child to. Because there's a scene where Will's talking to him about death, and he's like, "Are you scared of death or something?" And he's like, "No, I'm not scared of death. Like, I welcome it," or something like that. And it was just like, this is a little bit dark, you know, like in a different way. It's quite heavy.
I would agree with that. There are discussions that just kind of hit you, and you're like, "Oh, okay,
yeah,
we're doing this." And particularly the one in the library, Will's father just really goes on a full existential.
Yeah, there's this bit where he gets angry at himself because he gets angry at himself, and he's also getting angry at the boys because he's like, "Are you even listening to me? Have you even heard anything I've said?" Which is like seems like his own like internal frustration that he's just letting out on the boys because they're there. But it was still quite,
because I haven't really been listening, but that part really been saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really funny that that monologue was so significant for both of us, and in very different ways.
Well, I think it's quite out of place for the rest of the book. Because usually you're just dealing with the boys like either like in action, like physically running, or they're having like little conversations like as you would as a child.
I have a question for you. If you had to pick between a ride on the carousel or a trip to the magic hall of mirrors, which one would you not most want, but which one would you choose?
In terms of like what they give you?
Yeah. Or the experience, or how likely you think you'd be to survive?
Originally I found the mirrors scarier because of what the thing that happens with Miss Foley. And like that whole scene where she's like, "Oh, I'm fine," actually, like afterwards.
Yeah.
Also, this is like another like completely irrelevant point, but like her nephew.
Yes.
I've just remembered him.
Yeah. And the whole thing with him setting Will and Jim up for theft.
Yeah.
Running off.
And then he's just never spoken about again. That's another.
And also, I was under the impression that her nephew was Mr. Cougar.
Okay.
I think, because don't we see him turn into a boy through Will and Jim's eyes? That then, because I swear that Will and Jim see the nephew go from a man to a boy on the carousel. I was just very confused about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because if the nephew is Mr. Cougar, how did Mr. Cougar end up looking like Miss Foley's nephew? Because I don't think the carousel had those powers.
Unless she'd gone a bit strange because she'd had the mirror experience.
Maybe. Yeah, that could be possible. But I think all of this is kind of a clue, maybe not a clue, to the fact that whole section was quite confusing.
I mean, the whole book is kind of confusing.
Yeah, the whole book.
Yeah, so I found the mirrors scarier because of, and also the idea of getting trapped there and whatever. But then, and so I didn't really have that much of like, I wasn't that scared of the carousel until the end, where I think where Jim gets on, and then they kind of like, and Will's like absolutely desperate, and also Will's reaction when he thinks that Jim's died. Actually, the whole this is, I mean, go on forever, but like the whole thing about the laughter saving them was quite interesting and made it feel more like a children's book.
Yes, it was very much in the sense of like, I do believe in fairies.
Yeah, but it was the father who picked up on it.
Yeah,
kind of interesting.
The laughter thing, it did. I was like, would that work if you're that scared? Would you be able to summon up laughter But yeah, I found that really interesting. I was a bit confused by the whole carving a smiley face on a bullet thing.
Mm.
But I guess at that point you just have to just let logic go out of the window.
Yeah. What's the funny thing is that like some of the conversations were very based in logic and like the more philosophical things, but then it was also, you had to keep remembering that like the entire concept was magical, you know, like and based in unreality. Yeah.
There was also, I just thought, another symbolism thing. There would be carved wooden, I think they're Native American figures. A couple of times. I don't know what that was about. Yeah, another thing. One thing oh no, you go.
I was just gonna say I might try and like look at some of this up afterwards.
Yeah.
And just not very deeply, but try and find any little explanation. But maybe I do think it could be just him, like I said, like planting ideas and then wanting you to think on it, you know.
But also
so intentional.
You get the sense that he worked on this for such a long time that maybe he did just forget stuff. And I feel like so much existed in his head that didn't make it down onto paper. He's almost got like 7 books worth of this information in his head.
Yeah, probably the first draft was a lot longer than what ended up being printed.
I think it was.
And maybe it's things that were cut that are making it confusing.
That could be it. That could be it. And also the fact that the story itself, I think, came from a few different short story ideas he'd had that he tied together. So it could be things like that. If people can get this copy, do, because you can read like early chapters and extracts from the other versions, which is quite interesting because they're very similar but also quite different as well.
Yeah.
Before we go, there was one thing I wanted to touch on that it was a big reason why I didn't give it 5 stars, which is, what did you think about the female characters and the lack of female characters?
Yeah.
And how masculine it was as a book?
I think that was automatically like going to be a problem when you're following 2 boys. But the whole keeping their mothers in the dark, but then the father, and like there's no, I mean, Jim doesn't even have a father. And I think that there is a need for stories to be about like a father-son relationship. But I think because the cast was so small in this, that it did, I mean, the only female character is the villain.
Yeah. Well, you've got the Dust Witch, you've got Miss Foley.
Yeah.
Things don't go very well for her and their mothers. And I got the sense that the mothers were kept out of it because they would have been too emotional, almost. Like they would have stopped the boys because they would have been hysterical or got upset about it or said, can't do that, that's too dangerous. Which I don't like. I kind of want like an awesome, God, that makes me want to be sick, an awesome vibe. But like a really strong and helpful female character. I don't think it was needed because I really liked the intimacy. But it definitely felt like a boys' book.
Yeah. I think that there's going to be problems. Like if you have a small cast and they're all, well, like 2 of them are related, and it's so, yeah. And I feel like you have to make a kind of a conscious effort to not be too narrow with it, you know, which I didn't think was there. But again, it is a bit of like a contextual thing. Like I didn't know going into it that it was probably not going to be a century kind of.
I just really hope there weren't girls who missed out on it, because I have a feeling that it would have been marketed towards boys at the time. And it's such a good story. It is a bit batshit. And there are times where you're like, hang on a minute, what's going on? But I really enjoyed it.
It's part of the charm of it as well. Yeah. I was gonna say this is what we spoke about this earlier, but like how the characters feel like the Peanuts thing, you know, I was talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So in Peanuts, which is the story with Snoopy and Charlie Brown and like lovely American thing from the 60s, I think. In the adaptations of it, every single adaptation there is of it, the adults are kind of like this. It's like a horn. It's like wah wah wah. Like there's no, and you can hear like the kids have really like intellectual conversations, and the parents are, and any adult actually, or anyone outside of the kids, is this like it's just completely in the background. And that's what the side characters not the side characters, but like the characters outside the carnival and outside of Jim and Will and the dad felt like.
Even that before Charles became part of the gang.
Yeah.
There's this scene where Will comes home and I think he like puts on a caricature version of himself in front of his parents. And you can tell they're having a very superficial conversation. And then Charles scrunches up a carnival poster and puts it in the fire. And none of them talk about what's happened. It's obviously a conscious decision that he's made to have that cut off from the adults. So I do wonder whether it's a thing of the time, although I still think it exists today in children's books.
Yeah.
It feels very Peanuts though, like a terrible Peanuts.
It's the same era, so maybe it plays into that.
Yeah, and I mean they speak in the same way as well.
But obviously the Peanuts characters feel a lot older than they are, which is the opposite here.
Yeah.
Although the Peanuts characters are meant to be like 6. So it's slightly different.
Crazy. I feel like Charlie Brown's like 25.
Yeah, well that's part of that he's like a little old man.
Yeah.
Some of the things he comes out with. Yeah, that was kind of what I had to say on that.
Yeah. No,
I did want to know though what you thought of the ending.
Yes, the ending. Yeah, so I was saying to you when we've talked about this previously that there's no kind of, it's not like you get the epilogue or you get 1 week later. It just ends.
Yeah.
And it ends within the time, but it doesn't feel abrupt.
No.
It comes to quite a nice, natural close. I really liked the ending.
Okay.
What did you think of it?
When you said to me, because we spoke just before I'd finished it, and Anna said that like I'm really curious to see what you think about the ending. I was like, oh no, it's going to be one of those endings that like we'll just leave it off, and then because I feel like usually I would be dissatisfied with the way it ended, but for some reason it feels like I kind of didn't want to know more.
Yeah,
I want to know more about the characters and like, you know, but I didn't want to know more about like the future of Jim and Will and his dad. And I think there's a really nice line about how they say like, oh, first one to the or something like that, you know, and they kind of go running off. And then there's this line that Ray Bradbury says about how like they all arrive there at the same time or something like that.
I really love that because I think there is that sense at the end that the problems haven't completely gone away.
Yeah.
Their father is, say their father, it is like their brothers. Charles is still really worried about aging. And it's a really nice way to close it that no, he has still got it. And almost like he's bettered himself as well. Like I know that if he tried to do that at the beginning of the book, he couldn't have done it. I think
it's like he the reason why he wasn't doing well is because he'd like let adulthood kind of like drag him down a bit. And so kind of reconnecting with like being around young people and like reconnecting with his youth a little bit like was going to give him like a new lease of life.
Yeah. I completely agree.
And I was worried that like there's that bit when he's like, should I run or should I not? Because I'm like I'm a middle-aged man, I shouldn't be doing this, you know, like as though he's too weak for it. But then he does decide to do it and it does work out for him.
Yeah.
I just think it was like a nice, but again, it very much focusing on him as like almost like he's the protagonist and less so about the boys.
Yeah. And the fact that it ends with him as well is quite interesting. Does it start? No, it doesn't start with him.
No, it starts with that lightning rod salesman thing.
Yeah, that thing. The lightning that never came.
Yeah, I did. I'm not gonna lie. I did start the book and I was like, you know, like that first scene. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be any good, you know.
So dramatic. The start. It's like Jim Nightshade with his jet black hair.
Yeah.
They were born at the same time, and they're on this hill, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Not that I dislike it, but it is a bit of a strange opening.
Yeah.
Like the Night Circus, for example, opens with the line, I think it's something like the circus arrives at night. And so you're straight into like the focus of it. Whereas we have this kind of weird salesman bit.
Unless the storm is referring to the carnival.
Well, I have been thinking that, right? And I was thinking, would they have been safe if they'd left the rod on the top of the house?
Yeah.
But the salesman goes to so much effort to describe the storm and to describe exactly how they're going to be like fried in their beds by the lightning and how the house is going to go up in flames. That it was so lightning specific that it almost felt a bit much to be a metaphor.
Yeah, and also the like panic when Will notices that Jim's taken it down and then they go and like to the effort of putting it back up.
Yeah. And you're just like,
and then nothing happens. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Also the whole thing with the witch and the balloon we've said was really strange, but like the painting of the houses.
Although I do think the witch, the balloon,
that did tie in.
It did feel like it was the first time I was kind of like, is this in the boy's imagination? Because that whole thing feels like Will's fear is kind of like getting the better of him. And it turns out like it's just like it's not that big a deal, and like there's all these tricks in the light and stuff, and so yeah, I still think it was out of place.
It's interesting because so much of it takes place outside the carnival as well, and the carnival doesn't feel like an enclosed space. It feels like it just permeates the entire town or village or whatever it is. But yes, what are your takeaway thoughts on this book? Like, having had a bit of time to sit with it, how do you feel about it? What do you think about it? Would you read it again? What do you think?
I'm glad I chose it for this, because I think you're right that like it was something that I had like, you know, mark it as you want to read, but I mean half of the books that I mark as want to read on Goodreads I'm never ever going to get to, so it's just not going to be any time. So I'm glad I read it. I don't think, I don't know, I'm going to say like I don't think like my life is like that much improved having read it, you know. But I do actually think that maybe I disagree with myself because the conversations were quite valuable, and I think it's something that I might revisit like passages of it in the future when I'm older.
I think I want to reread it, but not for a while. I think it's a book that you can interpret, that because it's so much about age and aging and perception of life in the world, depending on how old you are. I do think it's a book that you could take different things from at different stages of life. Like,
yeah, exactly.
The fact that Charles is scared about death and about aging, but the boys are scared about being too young, not being old enough. I think it's really interesting. I loved, although it was a small part, I loved the importance of the library in it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really nice how excited boys got about their books. Because you just wouldn't have that today. I really like that.
Yeah. There were some nice descriptions of, I mean, because obviously he knows he's writing for a reader, so there are nice descriptions of the library and also what the library meant to Charles.
And that was possibly
It
one
was
of
like a safe place, yeah.
why it was so scary when it wasn't safe.
Yeah.
Because that felt like a safe space.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, that scene where they're hiding. I couldn't cope with that. That was possibly the worst scene for me. Not as in a bad scene, but I was like, I need this to be
Yeah,
over.
on edge, yeah.
Oh, I couldn't deal with the tension. It was so much. But yes, I just want to say thank you so much for choosing it because I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad about that.
Fun, and I think we need to do more fun books.
Yeah.
Our first book was fun. The two in the middle were not fun.
Yeah, Anna and I deliberately chose this one because Betty was a lot. And so was Mother Mother. Even Malibu Rising was like, again, there was like, yeah, there's a bit more to it, but it was nice to break things up a little bit and also to do something that was a little bit festive
as well.
Yeah.
Speaking of magical realism, we can talk about next month's book
as
well, which is very exciting.
Anna's choice, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really funny how we host each other's choices on our different.
Yeah, I think that's quite nice though.
I quite like it. Yeah.
It's just a coincidence.
Yeah, no, I really like it. And I really love this book. And I'm actually kind of devastated that our discussion is finished.
Yeah.
Because like I could talk about this book all day.
Yeah.
But I thought this book has been really fun. I love the magical realism. We need something fun in the middle of assignments. So the next book chosen is called Lonely Castle on the Hill. And it's a #1 bestseller in Japan. And I can't remember the author's name. I'd have to look it up. But it's got a really interesting premise. And it's definitely magical realism focused. I don't think it's very long either. I think it's quite a short book. But it's not available everywhere around the world. I know it's not available in Canada, and I don't think it's available in the US yet. So it's quite exciting that we're able to read it. But it's very available in the UK. You can get it in paperback. And it's about these children. I think they're children. Are they children? I can't remember. Maybe they're adults. These people that step inside their mirrors and find this magical castle.
I think they are children.
They are children, okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
The condition is if they don't all make it back to their rooms each night, I think they die, which kind of reminded me of this.
Yeah.
That it's something magic, but it's got a dark twist to it, which I found out.
With children as well, yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for picking this one because I genuinely don't think I ever would have actually read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to get to Fahrenheit 451, and I always have wanted to, but obviously that's just because it's a classic, and I feel like it's relevant. It's in like pop culture and whatever. Like you want to.
I think that could definitely be one that we read together, even.
Yeah.
But I want to have. I need something to sandwich the Bradbury madness.
Yeah, I think so.
In between. But what are your kind of before we go? What are your initial thoughts about next month's book?
I am excited to read something that's translated, and I'm very interested about the thing about how it's a bestseller in Japan and it's only just coming over here. And I'm kind of interested to see like what I feel like the best, like this is kind of a bit of what we study, but like the bestsellers here do definitely kind of tend to fit like a thing, and like that like it is very possible and people have done it before to like write to be a bestseller. And so like it'll be quite interesting to see like another country's a completely different culture from us, like what their #1 is.
Because And it's really depressing when you study it and you realise how formulaic it is and how homogenous everything gets, and how even the books that are breaking away from that are ticking boxes.
Yeah.
And obviously that's quite nice in some respects, but I really want to read something completely different, because this book is literally like nothing I've read before.
Yeah.
I mean, parallels to the Night Circus, but just completely mad.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I found it so refreshing to read. But I do think about this next book, I'm either going to love it or hate it.
Yeah.
Because I found translated fiction can be a bit hit and miss, depending on how well it's done.
Yeah, right. I'm hoping because it sells so well over there that they're trying to obviously make the same thing happen here.
Yeah,
So it will be a good translation, but we'll see. It might be kind of, I think it might be more difficult because it's because of like the genre it is.
Yeah, but I think we can have a really interesting discussion about it. And it's kind of, I know it's not, but it gives me a kind of Christmassy, wintry feeling with the whole magical realism castle.
Even the cover. Yeah.
And the cover with the kind of wolf thing.
Yeah.
We'll post pictures of our copies of the books.
Yes.
So that you can see. But I'm really excited to read it. I can't wait. Oh, you put the Mizuki
Tsujimura, something like that.
Tsujimura.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that we're saying it right. And
you can put it in the description.
But yes, I'll put it. I'm going to copy it and then I can put it in the description when the video is up later. I mean, it's up now.
Just conscious I'm disappearing into the dark over here.
I've seen, by the end we'll just see two blinking eyes. I think let's end it now. We've had a really good discussion. Thank you so much for being on my channel, and thank
you for hosting me. Yeah.
That's all right. Picking such an amazing book. Also, Jemima does our lovely thumbnails as well. So thank you for doing that one. It looks
of course. Yeah.
I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Yes.
Everyone watching.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.